So yes, last I was aware that this dev team was working on Underlab, I think back in 2023, question mark, if I recall correctly. But yeah, I'm not, I tried to keep updates, but I'm not as updated on literally over 24 games, and some of them are just, emails here and there. But we'll just do this, and if you should join titles and thumbnails the video correctly, yeah, we're just gonna do the tutorial single player. So quote unquote single player. Well, it is single player, but you get the point. You're supposed to be playing this with friends or other people, but I think at the time, I actually should check the lobby after this. We'll do it afterward, but otherwise, gameplay wise, we're just going to try to do a challenge and move on. We're not going to use anything in the chest. On occasion, I come to Project Winter or other light games and just kind of mess around, but otherwise, for the first minute or so, we're actually just going to be tossing out all the items just to kind of immerse myself. But, I mean, I don't have to touch everything in the chest. I'm just choosing to, but otherwise, this video is also just going to be more partly information on at least my experience with deduction games here and there, or at least games that are a lot more multiplayer. Obviously, I do have a few multiplayer games I could play, but I choose not to, so... And in fact, there are at least 3 that I regret, for various reasons, actually, for each of those games. So, yeah, not really much else to say. It's probably more than that, probably like 4 or 5, but the ones I can think of 3 off the top of my head. Not one of them not being Project Winter, which is what I'm playing now. Otherwise, I wouldn't be playing it at all or making a video on it at all. But there are going to be game dev things that come along my mind. So as we actually talk about things, I don't recall if I'm even part of betas. Basically, I'm trying to think of other games, not just Project Winter or Underlab, that I was part of beta or alpha testing for whatever reason. I don't often do that, but I know a few off the top of my head that I can recall trying to be a part of, at least. And that's all I'll say about that, because I don't know if I can talk about those experiences. But otherwise, it's not like, these aren't like professional. It's literally what you, the viewer, I'm pointing as if you can see me in real life, you, the viewer, can do in real life as well. So we can't swap clothes, so I have to actually change this challenge. But, yeah, I think you get the point. I have tried to get into games here and there, and I've learned my own fair share of things that are not doable, but things that are probably not... You probably shouldn't do, basically, even whether it's a social deduction game, whether it's just a party game, whether it's a multiplayer game, or if things that are actually good to do. So... as we are, and I try to remember 344, things particularly with Project Winter is that I think it has a very, what's the word? I always fail to think of correct words at the moment, but it has very precise gameplay. So what I mean by that is, oftentimes when you're dropped in, especially social deduction games, you're given an objective, but you're not given much more than that, which can, from what I've seen, frustrate a lot of players, as opposed to Project Winter, where yes, you are given an objective, but eventually it is very easy to understand within a game or two, and that sounds like that should be common for most party games or social deduction game or even multiplayer games, but you'd be surprised how, at least from what I've seen in my experience, how lost players can be. That's not positive or negative, like, it's not supposed to be disingenuous, but literally, like, players won't know what to do. They won't know what certain things are good for. So on and so forth. That's not to say Project Winter doesn't have these features. I think every game has that to some extent because of how players may or may not be able to explore certain mechanics. So for example, Project Winter has bunkers. When you run around and open bunkers in multiplayer lobbies, you will need more than one person as opposed to what I'm doing here. And so opening these bunkers and kind of figuring out, hey, if you can manage to grab the number of players required, whether it's 2 or 3, oftentimes you'll find some good stuff, as opposed to punching a tree or punching rocks, getting wood, and trying to craft what you might be able to just pick up from a bunker. That being said, bunkers have their self-crafting does have its advantages. I feel it's the more consistent way, or the safest but definitely slower way, to try and slowly work your way towards resources. But obviously bunkers are a much quicker way to manage things. And this also, not obviously, but to step back outside the forest to look at the forest for a moment, yes, you do have traders in this game. So for those who don't know Project Winter at all, it is a game of werewolf, it is a game of mafia, where you're trying to figure out who is You want to figure out who is working against you, because if you don't, you are going to lose. That's the design of Project Winter. And I think while it was certainly more alive than it is now, um, I think it did have a good balance of things. There are at least two examples I can think of at least asymmetrical games that did not, and maybe are still not, well balanced, well made, gameplay wise. But if they're fun, they're fun. Unfortunately, from what I think, those games that are not Project Winter here are not fun. So, and to kind of go back into the forest, so understanding the small, I wouldn't say intricacies, but certainly understanding what you can and cannot do with Project Winter, whether you're playing it casually, playing as a party game, or actually getting into it with friends and whatnot, and learning how basically the deduction among yourselves, because that is, I think, an important component when you're, especially when you're playing with friends. If you have a few games you play over and over, eventually you're going to not try to min max or be efficient, but your gameplay will evolve. I think that's the much closer way to put it, and I think that's a good thing. But again, understanding what and why to do certain things. Again, whether you go bunker hunting. Again, it's not like I'm just playing Project Winter here, but these are the kind of thoughts running through my head when I'm thinking, okay, I'm running around. What's the advantages of going into bunkers? What's the advantage of crafting? What's the advantage of gathering here and there? And in a multiplayer lobby, you can. I have seen basically, what's the word? Basically, each person has their role, but at the same time, as I said earlier, there are trader roles as well. And so, if you just let the traders do what they do, that wouldn't be good. So, to kind of go into, I guess, more I wouldn't say negative criticism, but at least I say would be closer to the topic of criticism, and I not gonna try to pretend like I understand, but basically making, it's a smaller minority. I wouldn't say it's a small minority of people wondering why Project Winter couldn't be made a single player experience. I certainly see how it could be made single player, but obviously that there is a kind of a pushback to that, and that's resources, whether it's manpower, time, certainly time, but basically resources have to be taken away from the multiplayer aspect. And since Project Winter is primarily a social deduction game, a lot of the gameplay balance basically updates immersiveness to fun. Immersiveness or fun value, it should be concentrated on the multiplayer aspect. That being said, if I were to think to myself, basically something closer to the tutorial version would be how you would just make a single player experience. And I don't think you would need extreme changes. However, any small changes, like basically making structures that you would probably see, or maps that you would see in multiplayer experiences, single player, that is still going to take a lot of time and resources. Again, you still want to play test things like that if you were to do that. So I understand why the dev team may not have chosen to, again, try to make a small little branch of the game inside of itself that allows for single player experiences. And again, someone like me who would like that is a smaller minority, because again, the game is focused towards, well, the multiplayer experience. So shrug, right? It would be a similar, if you could think of any game that you like, whether it's a social deduction game, but usually a multiplayer game that could use a single player experience, you would be, I'm sure you, the viewer right now, would be able to think of an example like that. So, I guess we can do this. We don't need to cook any items, I don't think, but that does mean we have to go through bunker stuff. And again, yeah, so basically making single-player experiences, you could just make it something simple like this. I say simple, it's actually quite complex, because going into basically balancing things that may come out in future updates for single-player would, again, divert resources. You would be surprised how many months, I will say months, you can lose just trying to add something small, even something smaller than single player. If you're adding a single player mode to a multiplayer game, that actually takes that can take actually years. So, and there are examples where that could take less time, but again, I don't know Project Winter, I don't know how it was made, I don't know its code, I don't know its development cycles, so again, it could be quite difficult, it could be less difficult, but I understand why, or I can sympathize with how difficult it can be to basically make even small things like cosmetics, which I think. No, I would say, again, I don't know Project Winter, but I would assume it would be of a similar. It would cost similar resources, if not a little less, than trying to make a single player mode. But yeah, I mean, I don't have much else to say at the moment. I'm trying to think, and so when I mean development cycle, and I'm for those who don't know anything about game development, what I mean by that is that, wow, how long does the team go through the actual, programming development? Are they doing it in parallel with themselves? What is that, by the way? Okay. Are they doing it in parallel with, game testing or designing or thinking of future content? Do they actually, split their development to phases? And I think about this with every game and their development team, but particularly for Project Winter, again, I don't know. That's what I mean, their cycle. Do they go through testing, then designing, then implementing any changes? Or do they actually do a lot more things with overlap in parallel? So maybe they are testing while developing, while also designing, while planning for the future, so on and so forth. I'm sure there's always some overlap, but how much overlap there is has its own. Let's just, again, for those who don't know game development at all, I'll say that choosing a style of development, whether you like to plan everything out and then test and then implement or whatever, has its ups and has its positives and negatives. And so when I bring this back to, again, making a single player experience, which is kind of the purpose of this, or kind of the topic of this video, because I'm playing this on my own for the moment, yeah, I can. It's easy to see, especially for a consumer, and so I go into my consumer brain here, how a single player mode can be designed, but actually developing it has its fair and even large share of challenges, or may not even be feasible because of how, again, maybe the game was developed in such a way that it's actually not feasible at all. Kind of is contradictory with what I'm doing right now in front of your eyes, but is it more fun or less fun? That's I think that's closer. So I may have had a different opinion in the past, but I feel like that very phrase I said is at least 50% or around 50% dependent on the players, literally. The player base, the consumers, whatever you want to call it, your audience, so on and so forth. I mean, yeah, that's not really much else to say. I wouldn't go so far as to say all of the time the customer or player is king, but certainly a majority of time they are, so... I think if I just run to the raid... Oh, never mind. Do I want to try these out? You know what? Yeah, because we are slowly starving, and I'm trying to do the challenge as well. It doesn't get you anything, by the way, for those who have never played Project Winter. Doing tutorial and doing challenges doesn't get you anything, unless only in the... Because obviously I'm playing the demo version. Funny enough, I used to have a Steam account that had a library of games. I no longer have access to it because I've lost every single... it's not the correct phrase, but backup to recover that account. So, shrug. I promise you, I've gone through at least 3 different avenues trying to recover said account. It did not happen, so that's why. And then this was an account made years ago, obviously before my Jordan MML account. So, shrug. Oh, right, it's a bomb. So, yeah, not really much else to say. But yes, can you make a single player experience? Well, yeah, you could, but it would probably cut into resources. So even right now, even let's assume for some reason Underlab, which is the game, like, I think it's the next game that this development team is also working on, if they're not developing multiple games, but you get the point. If they're doing kind of something for people who want to play solo for whatever reason, then yeah, I'm not. By the way, this topic does not. The topic of single player is not talking about adding AI. Adding AI, that is a whole. You might as well be making 2 different games, basically, in a sense. That's the simple way to put it for those who don't know any of development. But if you're not doing AI, again, if you're just having survive on their own, I think that's a lot more feasible. Not just a little more feasible, a lot more feasible than. I'm losing my words because I'm also just trying to make sure I complete this. But yeah, a lot more feasible than adding AI, basically. AI components, so CPUs, basically. But again, that can be made easier or more difficult depending on how the game is designed, developed, so on and so forth. So last thing to mention as we actually just find our way out. Actually, let me just make sure that I'm finding my way out correctly. Let's try not to starve. But, yeah, so let's go directly south, I believe. But see, I have watched people play Project Winter. I've had, you know, whenever I just am doing work and I just turn on something on the side, whether I'm watching or listening, I had fun. People definitely observing people play Project Winter. Let's just say that much. Along with other games that I'm also paying attention to. I just decided on Project Winter because I went through I looked at 5 games and went, which one can I make a video for? So. But yeah, I have to remember at the end of near the end of this video to actually look for other lobbies. The Survivor airdrop, don't need it. It actually provides a lot of nice stuff. I don't remember if there's a bigger set of resources in a Survivor airdrop in a multiplayer game than a single player game, or in this mode. But yeah, in any case, we are headed towards the, oh my goodness, the thingamajiggy. Help! I'm starving! But we're about to get out, so it doesn't matter. But yes, so I think I've had fun looking at Project Winter at least, but and I think I've played actually a few games again long time ago. Project Winter I think is at this point 7+ years old, so shrug, right? Now, when and will Underlab come out in about, you know, a few years time or less? Again, I don't know. I'm not as in tune. I just usually turn on news updates for games that I'm interested in and see if they are, see if they're coming out, at what time, how they're being developed, so on and so forth. But yes, without further ado, let's actually take a quick look here. There is in the lobby. Okay, last time I checked, there wasn't, and this one's in Japanese. But without further ado. Not really much else to say at the moment. I've actually played... If I try to play another game, this would make this video too long. So without further ado, yeah, not really much else to say. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you later. Bye!